Thank you all. Good evening. My name is Eliane Batson. I am the outgoing president of the Washington Map Society. After tonight, Jeff Katz will be the new president of the Washington Map Society. I would like to welcome you all to this program that is actually hosted by a partnership of map societies, including Boston, California, Chicago, New York, the Philip D. Phillips Society at the Library of Congress, Rocky Mountain, Texas, and of course, the Washington Map Society. These map societies are all nonprofit organizations that support map collecting, cartographic, the study of cartographic history, and we also supply financial support for the Zoom meetings. So we hope that if you are not currently a member of one or more of these map societies, that you do consider joining. They're all great societies that have a lot to offer. And we will include in the chat links to each of the map societies' websites, so you may go and visit them. The benefits do vary from society to society, so I encourage you to go and look at their websites and see what they have to offer. As an example, the Washington Map Society members do receive 3 annual issues of the Portalon Journal, as well as digital access to all past issues of the Portalon Journal, which is almost over 100 issues, as well as videos of past speaker meetings. We have over 35 on our website, and also a lot of other benefits on our new website that we just launched a couple of weeks ago. So we encourage you to check that out. We also have an introductory rate for first-time members of just $25 for a digital membership. So we encourage you to join both the Washington Map Society and the other societies. We also want to take a moment to thank our advertisers who do advertise in both the Portalon and the Calafia Journal, which is the journal of the California Map Society. They help make these meetings and our journals possible, so we greatly appreciate them. They are listed on this slide here. Before we proceed further with tonight's presentation, I do have a few requests for the Zoom meeting. Please do mute your microphone. I do need to let you know that we are recording this presentation. Like I said, it will be up on the Washington Map Society website for viewing again by members. So if you do not want to be visible in any way, please do also turn off your camera. If you would like to ask questions, please type them in the chat feature, and we will address them at the end of the presentation. And if you would like to stay on the meeting a little bit afterwards for some socialization, we welcome that. And now I will turn it over to Ron Grimm. And thank you for being here this evening.
Okay, as I think all of you are probably aware by now, that the other partner map societies have helped us develop a program schedule through June of 2021. And I would also repeat that we, the Washington Map Society Board, have decided not to schedule any meetings during July and August, but we will resume a monthly schedule starting in September. And those meetings are already booked and will start to appear in the publicity for the various map societies. And as you can see on this particular slide, our next, and it will be the final meeting of our spring season, is scheduled for Thursday evening, June 24, starting at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. It features Leah Thomas, the new editor of the Portalon, and in her full-time job as assistant professor of English at Virginia State University in Petersburg, Virginia. The title of her presentation is Nearly in a Circular Form, Mapping the Cherokee Nation through John Marrant's narrative of 1785. Okay, and next slide. Okay, now it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Matthew Gilmore, who is a member of the Washington Map Society. He is an author, a columnist, speaker, and blogger focusing on the history and the mapping of Washington, D.C. We will take a very close look at the Washington, D.C. Mall, the National Mall. The title of his presentation is Tilting Washington's National Mall. And before I turn the program over to Matthew, I will repeat that if you have questions, type them in the chat feature, and Matthew will address a few of them at the end of his talk. Matthew?
Thank you very much. Yeah, let me share my screen. All righty then. I assume you can see it. Say yes. Somebody say yes.
We see it well, Matthew.
Excellent.
No problem.
Thank you. So how this came about is I'm doing some research on the Olmsteds in Washington, and I'd spoken to the Washington Map Society before, I think 2015, about the Olmsteds and the permanent system of highways. And so I've been working on Olmsted stuff since then. And I thought it'd been a long time since I'd spoken. So what could I come up with that would be interesting to the Map Society? So, and also it helps that I walk across the mall every single day, back and forth to work and home. And so I decided to bring up the mall and its design. So, and the mapping thereof the mall. So if you look at the mall, and people not in DC, and some people in DC, may not notice a subtle tilt to the mall. The east-west line drawn from the Capitol misses the Washington Monument and misses the Lincoln Memorial by an increasing amount. So that it was a distinct decision to change that axis. So what I'm looking at is the design, a bit of the design aesthetic for changing the axis, and then some kind of conflicting cartographic aesthetics. So here's the aerial photography, and there's the line, and then look at this map. What's odd about this map?
Matthew, if I can interrupt for a minute, people say your voice is very low. I don't know if you're close to your speaker or not. And also your camera is not on. We don't see you at all.
Yeah, I'm not going to show you.
Okay, get a little closer. It's hard to hear you.
All right. So I'm exploring a little bit of this design aesthetic, how the mall came to be tilted versus a conflicting cartographic aesthetic that we sometimes see now. Is that better?
A little bit.
So if you look at this map briefly, there's something odd about it. This comes from the National Park Service. And if you look at it, and if you draw a line east and west from the Capitol to the Lincoln Memorial, you get a straight line. The map has actually been fixed. It's been tilted back east-west from the National Park Service. And I had noticed this because I was reading Peter Penser's book on the Washington National Mall. It's really the only book devoted to the National Mall. And I looked, I've been doing some research, and I looked at his map, and I suddenly realized, yes, that map has been straightened out as well. And I asked him, because I was coming to do this talk and I wanted to let him know, I asked him, well, where did you get the map? He said, oh, it came from the National Park Service. And so when I went and looked at the National Park Service maps, I saw, yes, those two had been straightened out. So what's kind of going on with all of this? And one, how did we end up with a tilted mall? Next slide, please. And how did we get from L'Enfant's plan for the mall to the mall today, and how did we get this map, which has been re-straightened out? So there's many versions of the L'Enfant and Ellicott maps. The first map was drawn by L'Enfant, but it was redrawn by Andrew Ellicott as the official map. And then we've got even another map, Dermot's tin case map, which is the final official one. So here's the L'Enfant plan, and here we've got the mall in the center of it. And we always say, well, we know what the mall is. Well, what did L'Enfant intend the mall to be? So he was not a very explicit generally, but he described it as a place of general resort where you have cultural events, cultural institutions lining the mall. So theaters, assembly halls, academies. So it would be kind of the academic, the cultural center of Washington, D.C. At the center of that, and so that's presumably the buildings shown along the edges. So at the center is the Grand Avenue, which people refer to, 400 feet in breadth and about a mile in length, bordered with the gardens. And right now, if you walk the mall from the Capitol to the Washington Monument, you do find at the end of the mall, you've got a slope off to 15th Street. And there's another description a little bit later in 1795, and people have suggested it's by Stephen Hallett, that is even more effusive about what the mall is and what it could be. And if you can imagine the northern edge of the mall aligned with Parisian style shops and residences up against, let's see if I can get it back to that slide, up against the canal. Which I realized I didn't show you too much. So that was some of the intentions for the mall. There we go. So what's the challenge for the mall and for what you're putting on it and aligning it and designing it? The topography was always going to be a challenge. So you've got, and if you're in Washington, and a lot of people aren't, but if you walk from the north side of the mall to the south side of the mall, you're going up about 30 feet. So the mall itself, even though it is east-west oriented, it was originally had a slope going from south to north. So you've got everything kind of on an angle. So here's one of the first topographic representations of the city inside the city itself. Let me flip it this way so you can see a little bit better. It doesn't render much of the mall itself, but you can see some of the topography. So like here's Capitol Hill, here's where the White House is. So this is 1791. So, but what I've read, and I've done Washington, D.C. history for quite a while. When I've read about the creation of the Washington Canal, which was what bordered on the north side of the mall, it simply stated, the canal, it took a long time, but the canal was built. There hasn't been much illustrating what the challenge really was. So they started the canal in 1793. So as the city is being laid out, the canal is started. But they don't make a lot of progress. In 1802, Congress creates a canal company. Benjamin H. Latrobe designed the canal. Still doesn't make a lot of progress. They come up with a new Washington Canal Company in 1809, and they start to make some progress. 1811, they're saying it's almost ready. It doesn't open until 1815. So why is this such a challenge? So part of the challenge is that if you look here, so this expanse in pale blue is what was called Tiber Creek. So Tiber Creek ran essentially along what is now the north edge of the mall, now Constitution Avenue. So basically from the Capitol all the way to the Potomac, which was a little bit closer at that point. But it was not just a little creek, it was actually a fairly substantial, although shallow, body of water. So all the blue is Tiber Creek. We're building a canal, and you can barely see it, sketched out right along here below this canal street. So you're taking all of this and you're going to build land to contain a canal in that space. So it's not very surprising that it took quite a few years to get this built, although Latrobe ultimately had, access to people who were building other canals and could get those workers. But it's just a little amazing that in, 1810, we're building land in what's now downtown Washington to wrap this canal in so that we can have this landscape built. So the element of that plays into this is the topography of the canal. I think they strongly influence where the Washington Monument actually was built. So here's a little bit more. So now we've tamed this landscape. So the blue still shows where the water had been, but here's our canal street. I'm sure this is not all built out this way at this point, but this is showing the ultimate landscape they intend. And we were going to a proposal for a university here, essentially slightly to the east, where the Washington Monument would be, which was right here. So if you can imagine that here's the intersection of the two axes from the White House and the Capitol. So here is where the Washington Monument was supposed to have been built according to L'Enfant's design. He had an equestrian statue in mind, which, just as a little sidelight, I'm trying to imagine what kind of equestrian statue would have actually fit into that landscape, because it's rather a large landscape, because the Washington Monument's 500 feet high and fills it, but an equestrian statue is a different kind of thing and may have gotten a little lost in that space. So this is the west end of the mall. This is the east end of the mall. So we've got lots of water. So here's the other end of Tiber Creek, which flowed down and merged with the canal. The canal also went to the Anacostia River. But we've also got all of this other water and fountains and channels here. So someone asked me as I was working on this, well, when does it actually become the mall? And I flipped the slides, I'm sorry. So the first time there's a map with the mall is 1802. So in this guidebook, the Traveler's Directory, getting you from Philadelphia to Washington in 1802, which of course you would have to do. The capital had just been in Philadelphia until 1800. So let's show you flipped around. So here's the city now. You can see the canal, or what we expect the canal to be. And you can see we also got Tiber Creek drawn in. And you can't make out very well there, but mall. So you've applied the word mall to this space for the first time. There's many questions in Washington, D.C. that are answered by this appeared on a map or this appeared in a book at this time, not necessarily a why. So someone was asking me why, and it's like, well, okay, here's a map with the term in 1802. There's your answer. We may not be able to answer why or who, except publisher. So then we're building the canal. So we built the canal by 1815. we've called it the mall. So what kind of happens next? So starting in the 1840s, what we consider the mall now was partitioned into a sequence of grounds. So you got the Washington Monument grounds on the west. You got the Agriculture, Smithsonian, the Armory, and the Botanic Gardens taking us up to the Capitol. So again, when people talk about the mall, there's lots of different definitions even today. And it came to me, well, the mall is kind of like 19th century Germany or Italy. It's a concept, but not a united entity. You look at guidebooks and they won't refer to the mall. They won't tell you to go look at the mall. They'll say, go look at the Smithsonian grounds, which was the primary element of the mall at the time. So first, the Washington Monument. So we begin the Washington Monument in 1833, start to plan for it. We lay the cornerstone in 1848, and it's displaced from that point I showed you right on the shore of Tiber Creek. People have said, well, we've looked through the records and nobody addresses why we moved it off of the axes. But you're building a 250-foot wide Pantheon with a 500-foot obelisk coming out of it. Perhaps you don't want to build that right on the shore. You want to give that an appropriate surround. So here's the monument, designed by Mills. So it's hard to imagine that kind of perching on the Tiber shore. You want to give it, want to be able to walk all the way around it. So that's why, although it's not written down anywhere, it might have been just simply too obvious that you couldn't plunk this right at the edge of the water. So when you displace the Washington Monument from that spot, that has repercussions down even to today. So here was Robert Mills' plan and where the Washington Monument was going to be. So the Washington Monument is the round one directly below the White House and directly west of the Capitol. The other two, and you can see it has its own grounds. So so he must have anticipated landfill to make this work. Still kind of a dangerous proposition. So it also may be that we've created a landscape there for the monument itself. And considering that it was supposed to be 600 feet high, they may not have worried too much about axes because everybody was going to see it. And there is no unified landscape from the Capitol to the monument to need an axis. So moving it off was probably just a rational decision. So, like I said. But just to give you a picture of what was happening once they started going, so you do have here the monument in 1851, and here we have the canal looking very rural. And you can see the foundations, and we can see we've only gotten about 150 something feet high. You've got the Smithsonian in the background. You've got other kinds of sheds for workers. You've got the Capitol Way in the background. So this is probably a bit of a idealized view. But you can see, again, you would not have want to put the monument right on the edge of the water. Here's the canal a little further in. I'm not quite sure which piece of the canal this is showing because it was downtown that had most of the bridges, but we don't see the Capitol in the background. So there were a couple branches of the canal. But again, this is the same 1851, same same artist, Seth Eastman, but again, showing the kind of rural and perhaps a bit rundown aspect of the canal. So here's the Washington Monument, completed and dedicated in 1885. And you can still see, actually, there's some dredging in the background that will come into the story. So what happened? So immediately to the east was the Department of Agriculture. We built that in 1868, designed by Adolf Kloos, and it's the only government agency located on the mall. And again, it's, you know, it's not, it's very of its time period. So then we've got the Smithsonian. It started construction just a tad before the Washington Monument, but it had been, you know, the conception was a little after the Washington Monument. So here's something just showing the grounds of the Washington Monument, or sorry, Smithsonian. And I circle, it's a little bit hard to read, I'm sure. So here's the Smithsonian, here's the new National Museum. This says reserved for, you know, some other buildings, but underneath they'd erased that it was where the first zoo was. This line says off the Department of Agriculture, and this is to city. So this is the kind of picturesque grounds of the Smithsonian. So here's the original coloration. I'm not sure which is easier to read. I think the pink version may be a little easier to read. This is the inverted version. So so they did not do the formal grounds that Mills had proposed. They went with the artistic aesthetic. And then we come to Armory Square, next square over, built in 1855, another red brick building. And we also get the Baltimore and Potomac train station a bit later, and the Army Medical Museum, also another red brick building. And at the furthest end, closest to the Capitol, we end up with the Botanic Gardens. It started out as the Columbian Institute, the predecessor institution. This piece of land that they were originally given, this chunk is now part of the Capitol grounds. This is First Street running through it. So this is where the Botanic Gardens was until the 1930s. That's a whole nother story. So here's the next big plan for the mall. So we had Mills' plan, now we get Andrew Jackson Downing's plan. So this is the way he designed it and how he published this map. But I think it's probably a little bit easier to understand if we flip it around like this. So we've got, in this case, he's incorporating the White House, the President's Park, into his design. So we've got the big L that has now been part of mall and downtown landscaping for a long time. So we can see the monument is obviously off the White House axis. It looks like it's on the mall axis, on the Capitol axis, except somebody reminded me, well, we've got the canal, which takes a little chunk of land, so it's actually off axis there as well. But this is the first time we create a plan for all of the public grounds, including the White House. And something of this was actually implemented. Downing is actually, respecting the different jurisdictions, the different chunks of the Washington Monument, the Agriculture, Smithsonian, and the others going east. So he's designing for all of them. So, but much of this did not happen, but much of it did, particularly for the Smithsonian. So then we come to more changes. So in 1872, we closed the canal and covered over and turned it into a street, B Street, which is now Constitution Avenue. So the canal had been problematic for many years. did not drain into the Potomac because the tide would just bring everything back in. So it was unpleasant most of the time. So there were always requests to dredge it, clean it, and that's fine, except it's expensive. So Alexander Shepard, who wasn't governor yet, got his work crews together and covered it over. And by November, they were saying a great work has been accomplished. They also built the train station on the mall, which was another problematic thing. Now, as I was doing this and trying to find maps showing axes of the mall, straight or tilted, or how the Washington Monument played into them, I came across this curiosity from 1873. This map is supposed to show the progress of buildings in the city of Washington. So all the stuff that's colored in red are supposed to be existing buildings, existing construction. But if you look at the mall, I said this is perhaps aspirational because some of these things never existed. And so there is not a cluster of monumental buildings in the middle of the mall. So we do have the Smithsonian and the new National Museum, or the National Museum, and the Armory, and we've got agriculture. So this is all real. This is all basically fiction. There's a train station coming in here, but that's not what the train station looked like. And over here, we've got some kind of water body. And you can see it would have taken up part of where Constitution Avenue is now, and we've straightened everything out. So we've moved the Washington Monument over to on axis with the White House and on axis with the Capitol. And so this is, a bit of a fiction. The mall is a lot of the mall is a fiction in this map. And also we don't have all these office buildings around the Capitol either. So like I said, this is kind of aspirational or planned or wish casting. So, but what was coming and was being planned and actually did happen was the reclamation of or creation of land out of the Potomac, what's now Potomac Park. Here's one of the original plans from 1879. And the interesting thing is it shows the extension of the street grid into that new land. So there's not many maps that show this because it was not entertained for too long. There was just not the mechanism or the will or the politics to support selling to private entities the land the government had spent money creating out of the river. It was almost immediately declared a public park. But it is interesting to see them proposing a street grid being built over this. So, and the other aspect of this, of course, is that the mall, which, sometimes doesn't even include the Washington Monument, suddenly the mall can be extended all the way out to the Potomac. So we have lots of new land which we can design, or actually will need a design. So here by 1890, there's been a lot of progress. Much of the fill has been done. The street grid has been abandoned. So we're creating the new park. And just to give you a little flashback, here's what they were thinking things looked like in 1871. So again, there's some fiction going on here. So the Washington Monument in 71 was not finished. There was no, it was not going to have its 250-foot base. But you can see the canal, you can see things going on, and you can see them a little bit better when I zoom in. So you've got a number of things. And of course, it never actually looked quite that neat and tidy. And you can see here some of those bridges I was referring to. So Perhaps that image was from this arc of the canal. So by the 1890s, we've completed most of the creation of land out of the Potomac and giving us the opportunity and the need for a new design. And it's also, we're headed for the centennial of the government moving to the capital in 1900. So they were very slow off the mark in deciding to do something about that, but they ultimately did decide to. But along the way, so I said, we've created some new land. We need to do something with it. And I stumbled across this one again. Someone else had blogged about this, but this is a quite eccentric proposal. It's from 1896. The first senator from Utah says, let's build a 1 yard to the mile surface map of the United States in Potomac Park. And he actually, introduced it to Congress, 1896, it gets referred to committee, but he actually has quite a defined proposal for creating this map and the educational purposes to which it could be put. There's a hint that he was trying to do something similar at the Columbian, World's Columbian Exposition a few years earlier, but I haven't been able to actually document that. And of course, it's, I was talking with somebody about this and it's like, well, okay, so if we had done that, we would have put Alaska in Roslyn and somehow the Hawaii would be, in Arlington Cemetery or someplace like that. So this wasn't entertained for long, but it shows people were thinking about, how do we make use of this new land? So Senator McMillan, who chaired the district committee and gets credit for what happened next, started off with a couple missteps. So we need a new design for the mall, this new land. Let's do something. And he proposes this avenue be slashed through the mall just at this eccentric angle up to where the old Naval Observatory is. And if anybody knows anything about Washington, you can imagine this did not go over well. The proposal was not well received. The architects really, really did not like this proposal. It just is, you're just tearing up the city. And a gentleman named Franklin Webster Smith was a bit eccentric, but influential. He was at McMillan's elbow. So whenever you see this National Galleries, that's his plan to recreate Egyptian and Babylonian and Roman galleries in this massive construction and have it somewhere near the mall. So here's one of their first plans. So we'll just slash this avenue across the mall, paying no attention to anything that exists already. Or we'll do something like this. So we'll slash a couple new avenues through and we make the National Gallery even bigger. So just imagine this is from 17th Street, basically the Potomac River. So this is, this has got to be a mile long. So again, rather eccentric. I mean, you could fit all of Federal Washington into that space. And then here's another version. Now we're not putting in the avenues, and we've made a little squiggly path to the Washington Monument, and we're getting rid of all of these different areas of urban infrastructure. So this is, this is like 50, 60 blocks of the city, or even more, that's being torn up for this. And we are putting the railroad station, which came from the north, we're making it come from the south, and we're putting it right in the middle of the mall, which is basically where it was, but was one of the really irritating things about what had happened on the mall. So the engineers jump into the game. So the Army Corps of Engineers was a part of the district government, part of the district planning. So here's their depiction of what L'Enfant's Mall plan looked like. People have told me, oh, no. But this is what the engineers, how they depicted what L'Enfant had planned. So we've got the canal. We've got a central avenue bordered by trees. We have all of these buildings. And you can imagine this is where, along this north edge, is where, the Parisian shops and cafes and lifestyle is supposed to be. But you can see where, if you looked at those pictures of the canal, how that would never have actually worked. So we've got this as kind of a baseline for them to say, all right, this is what he planned. Now, how can we make this into today's reality? So they did one plan like this. So you can see the similarity. So we've got the avenue and we've got this one. So it's on the east-west axis, but it just circles around the Washington Monument. So we've created, a new kind of space at the meeting of those axes that's kind of vacant. And we've got other things going on. We've got some big fountain in the middle of the tidal basin on the 17th Street axis. So is that going to compete with the Washington Monument? And we've got a new bridge going across the Potomac River, Memorial Bridge, and that also impinges on the axis. So we've got a memorial arch there, and we've got something on this on the axis as well. So we've kind of crowded the axis, but we've got the Washington Monument standing a bit off of it. Then they said, all right, here's a second try. So in this case, they tilted their new avenue to the Washington Monument. They keep this little void of space. They keep the big fountain. They turn the park into a big parade ground. And we still do, I don't know whether we still have a arch. The map doesn't go out that far. This map doesn't go out that far. So again, they're saying, well, here are two options for revitalizing L'Enfant's plan. So, but there's an amazing footnote. Basically says, never mind. The realization of the original design of the mall is not deemed advisable at the present time. So they've gone to this exercise. Here's what L'Enfant planned. Here's two options, but never mind. There's something better. They had hired Samuel Parsons, and he came up, well, this is what the park was going to look, some of their park plans, but here's what Parsons had come up with. Now, I find this really exuberant and really hard to read. So what is that going on? Well, we've got a big train station built here. We've got the National Museum, but the Smithsonian itself is gone. This is agriculture, and that's the Washington Monument. So again, we've tilted the axis to the Washington Monument. These big things are drives. So these drives give you a circulation through the park, the streets, the arterials are depressed under those, and a bit like what we have now for some of them. And we've also carved away what was B Street and taken that bit of infrastructure and extended ourselves all the way up to Pennsylvania Avenue. So we've expanded what the mall was going to be. So here's one of Franklin Webster Smith's plans. And this one is one of my favorites because since we don't have the Washington Monument where it needs to be on the White House axis. We're going to build another one, the Lincoln National Memorial. So we're going to have two, a Washington Memorial and a Lincoln Memorial. So that will at least fix up the White House axis. And we're going to build all of these other structures around it and fountains. And it's just pretty incredible. And later on, the Senate Park Commission, well, no, I think it was Burnham actually, said, the argument in favor of twin obelisks might in the future be advanced to permit the erection of a row of such memorials. And as time went on, we would have a cyclopean stockade of obelisks bristling from the Capitol to the Potomac. Very, very good visual. So the engineers are working, the architects say, no, we need to let you know how the mall should be redesigned. So Glenn Brown was head of the Washington chapter of AIA. So he's coming up with plans, and you can see here that, well, what's going on? He actually has also oriented it to, again, slightly tilt the mall, also take out all the land in what's now the Federal Triangle up to Pennsylvania Avenue. So that's kind of the context in which the Senate Park Commission was, the atmosphere in which it was working. So here's another one. Edgar Sealer, similar kind of thing, but more like the engineers. He drives the avenue straight through, and Washington Monument is sitting to the side. There's a bit of a construction around it to symbolize something, but we've also got things like this big tidal basin. So just remember that, because that will come back again. So here's the Senate Park Commission. So the Senate Park Commission distinctly does create the new axis and tries to design around the White House axis flaw. So it's easier when you see it this way. So we've got the axis tilted, as I said. So we've got the axis running to the Washington Monument. Then we build kind of a counterpoint next to it, gardens, and then the axis continues on to the Lincoln Memorial, which is not sited until 1909 or so. So although Senate Park Commission in 1902 knew where it should be, it just took a while for everybody else to get there. So the Senate Park Commission is the one who reset the axis of the mall that we have now. They don't talk a lot about it. So you can see that the architects had been a bit mixed about what should happen, but most of the plans actually did in some way address that. The Park Commission, they just say they want to restore the axial relationship of both. And so they could angle the east-west line, but you couldn't angle the north-south line because that would be really kind of eccentric. So that's why they came up with a different type of solution. So what happened after they came up with their plan? Well, the Senate Park Commission plan was never officially adopted. So it was always a bit of a struggle. The commissioners, the four men, the St. God's dies, were an informal, well, a quasi-formal board, advisory board, for a number of years until the Commission of Fine Arts was created, or with some gaps there. So, but the first thing is we need a new agriculture building. So 1902, so after the plan, well, the building was planned before the Senate Park Commission plan was released. So they didn't feel obligated to consider it. President Roosevelt had agreed to the location of the building. Senate Park Commissioners go to Roosevelt, strong arm him into supporting their perspective. So agriculture had wanted to be much closer to the center of the mall. Senate Park Commission had defined the particular angle and the particular dimensions of the center of the mall in which buildings were excluded. So what happens to this building is they take the plan and they move it south and they build as much as they can. And it was supposed to be square. So basically a center building with two wings, then wrapped around. And they just build the wings as far as they can and stop because there's a street. And they show on multiple plans where we're going to close the street and square out the building. The street was South B Street, now Independence Avenue, not too likely to have been closed. It was not exactly a major thoroughfare, but pretty important street. So now the building has arches over that street to its annex. So the next struggle was the new National Museum, which you'll now know as Natural History. And that's located on the north side of the mall. And now the question is not exactly where it should be located. They were in soon enough to get it located out of the building exclusion area. But kind of a trivial question, but still important. Do you align it with B Street, which is east-west, or with the center line of the mall, which is not quite east-west? So which way does the building, is it supposed to sit? And one of the suggestions was, well, have the north side match B Street, have the south side match the center line. It'll just be an odd shaped polygon. That did not fly. So they actually did align it with the mall center line. So if you look at the aerial photography in the map, aerial photography particularly, you'll see that the facade on the north side does not follow Constitution Avenue. It is angled away from it. Now, the Grant Memorial at the base of the Capitol, of course, it doesn't have the angular issue exactly. But once you place it there, it should probably be right on the center of the center line, pass through. But in this case, Washingtonians and their love of trees, and congressional love of trees, caused a problem. We're placing this right basically in the Botanic Gardens, and there are trees which have been planted by congressmen and senators. So we had to shift the location of the Grant Memorial a few feet south so they wouldn't take out the trees. Senate Park Commission members, Frederick Olmsted and McKim, they worked on the compromise. Which Washington, D.C., all of these things are extremely bureaucratic and memorials take years to get constructed. They worked with them to get it in a place where everybody could agree. It took them a long time. Daniel Burnham, who was the other commissioner, was rather annoyed that they compromised, but he was off in Chicago. So we build a Lincoln Memorial. It finally lands on the spot that the Senate Park Commission intended after years of debate, and is actually put on the axis. So no problem. So now, just as a little sidelight, another one of these curiosities of Washington. So it took a long time for the mall to be developed as it is now. it's not really until the 30s that much of the landscape as it now exists was laid out. And part of that, so the Washington Monument is there kind of in the middle between what leads up to Lincoln Memorial and what led back to the Capitol. That was kind of its own separate, unintegrated piece. And they go to Frederick Law Olmsted Jr., member of the Senate Park Commission, but 30 years later, and say, could you design a landscape for us? It didn't have it. There were lots of debates about it. He criticized what the Senate Park Commission had created. But the interesting thing about it is they're saying, like, all right, we're not sure you can do the Senate Park Commission plan, which would have had carved a divot out of the hill the monument was on to build the gardens in a basically in a sunken kind of way, carve off 40 feet. So one of the suggestions was, well, you need to fix the foundations of the monument or dismantle the whole thing, put in a new foundation and rebuild it. It would only cost $1 million, but it was deemed that from a historical and sentimental standpoint that might not be acceptable, which I think is very, very true. I just cannot imagine, pulling apart the Washington Monument, labeling each block, and then reconstructing it. Does not seem that anybody could even suggest that, but they suggested a separate Lincoln Monument. So now that kind of takes us through the start, the middle. How did we get where we got? So what kind of maps do we see today? So we've got that tilt on the maps, which you saw on the aerial photograph. And, in some ways that does feel a little bit uncomfortable. So maps as a, representation of the actuality deal with it a couple ways. So in some maps, and a lot of them, the touristy maps, the kind of wayfinding maps, cope with it in certain ways. So this map, you look at it and say, oh no, they straightened it out. But no, actually the line they drew east-west does have the two monuments south of it. So the landscape is actually underneath is actually tilted, but they drew a line to straighten it out. This map kind of hurts my head. It looks like it's right, but not quite right. It looks like it's actually bent. So I'm not quite sure how that kind of optical illusion works, but that's another one. National Park Service kind of hides the fact that it straightened it out here. You can see all these pieces of the mall are all pretty much uniform. So this is all pretty straight. So they straightened it out. And here's similar. And just jumping back, so here back in the 40s, a gentleman who worked with the Army Corps of Engineers, his is a little bit difficult to make out, but looks awfully straightened out as well. So I'm not just picking on the National Park Service. But the Park Service also did something kind of strange with their historic district map, and they seem to have straightened it out here too. And I don't quite know how you would do that if you're working off of GIS, but they seem to have. So what was the origin of the Washington Monument being off axis? I think it's the topography, that you build this very large memorial and you don't want to put it right on the edge of the river because partly you can't even access the whole thing. You'd be walking in the river, or you would have to be reclaiming land and creating foundations, doing pilings, a lot of risk. And also Mills wasn't, his design didn't really require a distinct axis because he's got, it's, you can see it because it's 600 feet tall, and he put those other kind of obstacles between it and the Capitol. So its landscape itself is only that what's now the Washington Monument grounds. So he isn't really designing a whole composition that takes us and uses that axis. Why create the tilted center line? Because the Senate Park Commission was creating a composition which wanted that axis. It's kind of awkward to have your composition have the Washington Monument off center. If you're going like, we're looking straight east-west, and this is the important vista, we're framing it with trees and buildings, and to have the Washington Monument off center was just not what would work for the Senate Park Commission in their plans. And of course, it's not visible on the ground. You can walk across the mall and you never realize that the angle is not strictly east-west unless you really, I suppose you could try and figure that out. And, you know, maybe this is just a better design. And why would you want to correct the tilt on your maps? Well, you've got a very orthogonal Washington, D.C. So virtually everything, unless, well, they're all north, south, east, west, except for those ones that are at a particular angle. So it's so small, the deviation is so small, it looks like you made a mistake. So let's just make the map more comfortable for our tourists. Does it need to be? Is it a bad thing? Is it a better map because there's less distraction about, well, that looks funny? Or should it be more correctly representational? I kind of throw that question to all of you. And I have a lot of things that I reference, so that is where I end. Thank you very much.
Okay, Matthew, thank you very much. I think for those of us who live in the DC area, it's very intriguing to see how the National Mall has gone through so many plans. Now, there have been some questions typed already, and let me see if I can go back to them. Oops.
Good.
Okay. Don Ziegler asked, the proposed ground map of the US, which I think was supposed to be near the tidal basin, shows Mexico and Central America. That caught my eye too. Do you have any explanation for that?
I don't exactly. This is 1896, so perhaps there were expectations.
That's what crossed my mind.
I mean, we haven't fought the Spanish-American War yet. I just have a very long piece of text from that, and I just want to see if he addresses this anywhere. I don't. Because he mentions it as, you know, a very educational thing so that, you know, tourists coming can look at the country miniature. And most of what he was interested in was showing these Easterners how much bigger the West was. So United States would have been 150 acres, Mexico 36, Gulf of Mexico 30, Central America 9, Great Lakes 5. Doesn't really address why he included those, unless it's just maybe for context. But of course, he's not including Canada. So That's as much as I can tell you.
Okay, another question from John Hunigan. How many degrees off due east-west is the tilt?
I can't tell you off the top of my head. I can look that up, or I can find out.
Okay,
It's not many degrees, but I should know that. And I'm sorry, I don't.
okay. Next question from Andrew Reynolds. Could they have kept the canal above the mall, or was it mutually exclusive and necessary to landscape the mall similar to what it is now?
No, they could have kept the canal. Like I said, the canal ran along what is now Constitution Avenue. And, you know, when flooding happens, it floods the basement of various museums and buildings along the way. So they could have kept it, but it was the grade that it had was just so shallow. I mean, when it was shallow, and so the tide would push everything back in. So, you know, it wasn't pleasant because they had the center market and people would just throw their trash out. So, you know, there's always the kind of stereotypical stories about, oh, look, there's a dead cow in the canal and, you know, it's been there for, you know, a long time and it smells really bad. So, but had somebody decided this was an important attribute of the city and they were going to spend the money to maintain it, they could have. Of course, the other little piece of that is you've got the canal, which extends all the way to basically the Botanic Gardens and arcs down to the Anacostia River. So part of the issue was you have to maintain the bridges across the canal too. So that's a big expense. And that really cut off the Smithsonian from downtown Washington. And it's just one of those, once you start to add up the costs of maintenance versus the utility, I think they decided, let's clean up the nuisance.
Okay, it's my understanding, isn't it, that the Tiber Creek still flows through sewers underneath Constitution Avenue? Is that correct?
It is correct. It is correct. They had, Tiber Creek came, you know, comes down and then takes a big left turn, basically down where Constitution Avenue is, or at the mall. And they arched over the canal and filled around it. But yes, basically turning it into a big sewer.
Okay.
And you'll see newspaper articles about that.
Okay, Angela Ray says really interesting content. And her question is, where did you source all of these Washington, D.C. maps? I think that might be interesting for some of our guests who are not from D.C. If you could just briefly say where you got some of these images.
Well, I think people will be happy to hear that a lot, or if not a lot, most of them came from the Library of Congress. So there's a tremendous number of resources there. I mean, the relief map of the United States in Potomac Park, that actually comes out of one of the newspapers in Chronicling America. Most of the other maps do come from the Library of Congress collections. One or two, I think, come from, might be from the Olmsted collections in Massachusetts. But yeah, Library of Congress is most of it.
Okay, J.C. McElveen asks, one of Seth Eastman's sketches shows a person fishing in the canal. Given what was thrown into the canal, was fishing in it ever a possibility?
Well, if there's water, you can try and fish in it. And that might have been at a point where they cleaned it out some more. And of course, I think at one point of that, the canal is about like 140 feet wide. So you have, there's many pictures showing, kind of mud flats in the canal. So if you think about it, well, the canal is really wide and really shallow. So the stream of water going through it, that could have had fish in it. And the unpleasant stuff is kind of laying there on the mud flats.
Okay, I think that is most of the questions. Again, I'd like to thank you. And I would just probably surmise that we have just talked about the one area in the city and probably in the nation that's probably been mapped more than any other place in the United States. You can disagree with me if you want, but I just think it looks like it went through quite a few variations and designs and hopes and aspirations.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's the funny thing that that until a few years ago, there wasn't a good book on the mall. So the one I mentioned, Peter Penser's book, is really the first book devoted to the mall itself.
Okay, good. Okay, to thank you, we'd like to give you some speaker gifts, and both of these are going to be DC oriented. First is a set of note cards from Cherry Blossom Creative, which is a business here in DC. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
I think so.
And then a cut line map, a metal map of Washington, DC. And obviously what's featured in the middle is the mall.
I always wanted one of those. Excellent.
Okay, you'll get one. Okay, I guess if any of you would like to stay around for a few minutes and just chat or ask some questions of Matthew, we can open it up.